Hello, it's Mindy from My Creative Scoop, and I'm back with another tutorial for Neat and Tangled. This month I'm using this adorable stamp set called So Foxy, and I'm going to be teaching you how to color him using our Copic markers. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is color the areas of the fox that I want to look smooth. So I'm going to be using YR14, YR12, and E23, and I'm just going to add a little bit of the darker colors to these shadowed areas. So I like to color from dark to light. So first I like to add, I like to think of where's the light source. So I just add a little bit of the darker color and pull it out with each new lighter color. So now I'm going to go ahead and take my YR12 and just blend out the YR14 a little bit. And they're very similar in colors. So we need to go a little bit darker. Now, instead of using a darker orange where it's just gonna be, it's gonna have more brightness to it, I need to add a little bit of a darker brown in order to make that orange pumpkin-y color for the fox stand out a little bit more and really create those shadows and have that nice light to dark contrast and really create that depth. So I'm going to be using some E23 and I'm going back over the shadowed areas. So I'm starting back at the beginning where I very first put down that YR14, and I'm not adding as much color this time because I don't necessarily want it to look like it's brown. I just want it to look like a darker version of the orange color that we're trying to create that depth with. So after I go ahead and put all my darker shadows down, I'm going to want to blend it out a little bit. So I want to go back with my YR14 and replace that E23. So that's what's making it become a darker shade of the YR14 with that underlying E23 along the bottom. So just go back and add a little bit more of that. And of course, you're going to have to go back and add a little bit more of the YR12 in order to get that nice blend, since we have that little bit of there's a line now that we've created with that YR14 with the other colors that we have underneath. So I'm going to blend that out a little bit. And now we are going to go ahead and create some texture on the rest of the fox's body. So instead of adding, just going one swipe across to create all of those, in the shadowed areas, I'm going to add all of these little flicks and dots for some texture. So that way our fox looks really furry and it really stands out from the smoother areas. So that way you can really tell the difference between the fur on his body. So I'm just taking the YR14 and just going over the entire rest of the fox's body, so that way we can create this texture. Now I'm going to take my R32 and just add a little bit of pink into the insides of the ears. And then I'm going to take my R30 and just fill it all in. Now I'm going to take E23. I really want the rest of the fur to be a little bit darker. This will also make the body stand out from the smoother areas that we have colored already on our fox. So I'm just doing the same thing, little flicks, little dots all over into those areas where we want to create that texture. You do want to focus a little bit more on the shadowed areas, so that way it still looks shadowed, which we're going to be doing in the second coat. So now I'm going to take the YR12 and just go one swipe over, really filling in the rest of the fox's fur. And since we already have all of those little textured lines underneath, it's really going to, it's going to blend it out a little bit, but you're still going to be able to see all those textures underneath. So this way, when we go back over and do another coat of all those little lines and texture, the little flicks, it's going to even have even more texture. But this looks a little bit more, it's softened under this first layer. So to really make the color stand out and to really get some darker of shadows in this hair, we're going to go ahead and use some E74. And I just love the way this color looks against the orange. So when you're using and you're going back over using some of the darker colors, you want to be a little bit more cautious on how you're coloring, because you don't want to create too big of a line. So you have to be a little bit more careful. So this is the area that I was saying with creating the more shadowed areas. Since we have that banner right in front, we really want right underneath or right above the banner onto the fox's tail to be a lot more shadowed. So notice it's a little bit thicker right in that area. So I'm just going to go back and add a little bit more of a shadow underneath the areas, so underneath where the banner is, and then again by the tail. So now I just want to go back and add a little bit more flicks for some extra textures and really make the fur stand out. Also, by adding those extra brown colors, it really makes the smoother parts that we used for underneath the mouth and on the tips of the tail and the feet, it really stand out. So for the banner, we're going to be using E33, E31, and E30, and also a little bit of the E23 for some extra shadows. So you want to add a little bit of color right in those folded areas, so that way it really looks like it's folding and we're creating those shadows in between the folds. And then I just like to blend out my colors, so I'm going from dark to light, still leaving a small space. I know it's, it is a small area, but it's nice to add that extra little bit for the E30 to really get that light to dark contrast. So I like to work from doing the one side completely, so that way by the time I get to if I were to do the other side and then go back and add my shadows with the E23, I'm taking the chance of it already being dry and then having a hard time blending it. So I always like to work in sections, so do one side at a time. And then I'm going to go back over, so I'm doing the E23, and then I'm skipping between the colors. So I'm skipping the E33 and going straight to E31, so I can just give a little bit of a blend along that E23 and have it smooth out nicely and still keep that really light to dark contrast. So I'm doing the same thing now on the opposite side, starting with my E33 and then blending out with E31 and then E30, and then putting those darker shadows in with my E23 and then going back to my E31. If you don't have a lot of room, or you have a limited amount of space, or you've already kind of saturated your paper, it's always nice to skip in between colors when you can, so that way you don't again have the ink seep out of the outline of your stamp, or you lose that really dark to light contrast by adding too much dark. So I'll skip between colors. And then I'm going to touch that up with my E31 to get a nice smooth blend. And as you can probably see, I've gone out of the lines a little bit. So I'm going to share with you a little trick that I use since I'm going to be die cutting this out, I want to be able to I don't want to go out of the line. So I'm just taking my white gel pen and just smoothing out where I went over outside the lines and covering it up. Using it is like whiteout. It's so much easier and better to go ahead and do this rather than using your blender pen, because then it's just gonna create a bigger mess and push all of that extra ink out. So this is a great way to use your white gel pen. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and have a wonderful day.